My parents told my sister to walk down the aisle instead of me at my wedding. My name is Elora, and I recently got married. I should be glowing with joy, soaking in the magic of newlywed bliss on my honeymoon. But instead, I find myself here typing this story because writing it out feels like finally taking a breath after holding it in for decades. Wesley, my husband, encouraged me to share it. He said this story needed to be told, not just as catharsis, but as proof that people like me can stand up and win. I've created a throwaway account for this because I'm not a regular Redditor. Wesley is the Reddit enthusiast in our relationship, and he didn't want this attached to his usual username. He also insisted that I write it myself, since it's my family and my history. So here I am. He's reading over my shoulder and helping me keep my facts straight, but the words are mine. Before I tell you what happened with our wedding and the truly unthinkable request my parents made, I need to go back. Back to where all this began. Because understanding why we did what we did, and why it even mattered, means understanding the deeply uneven household I grew up in. I was born a little over a year after my sister, Mallory. From as early as I can remember, Mallory was the sun, and I was the shadow that followed her. My parents, Corinne and Ronald, didn't try to hide it. Mallory was praised for everything, excused from every mistake, and endlessly defended. If Mallory and I had a disagreement, it was always my fault. If she accused me of doing something wrong, I was punished, no questions asked. If I had proof I hadn't done it, they said I was being manipulative or trying to cause trouble. Birthday parties were an early and obvious showcase of their favoritism. I wasn't allowed to choose the flavor of my own cake, it always had to be Mallory's favorite. If I complained, they said I was being difficult. But on her birthday, Mallory got every preference granted. I was often told, "Be happy for your sister. You'll get your turn." But that turn never came. Family outings, vacations, even Saturday dinners were about what Mallory wanted. My preferences were an afterthought, if they were acknowledged at all. It wasn't just that they spoiled her, it was that they diminished me to make the pedestal she stood on look taller. Mallory grew up knowing this. She basked in it. In our early childhood, she simply ignored me. But as we entered our teenage years, that changed. She began actively targeting me. I'm not sure what flipped the switch, but I think a big part of it was that she didn't have any real friends at school, while I had a decent social circle. She became more isolated, and I became more visible. That imbalance made her angry, and she lashed out by accusing my friends of stealing, spreading lies about me, and manipulating our parents into grounding me for behavior she invented. My parents, of course, sided with her every time. I wasn't allowed to see my friends anymore. They told me my friends were a bad influence, that Mallory didn't trust them, and that I should stay home and enjoy family time. They even said things like, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" What saved me from complete social isolation were my cousins. Many of our extended family lived nearby, and I had a close bond with my cousin Harriet, even though she was a few years older. One day at a family barbecue, she invited me to an event I don't even remember what it was, and I quietly told her I couldn't go because I wasn't allowed to have friends. When she asked why, I said, in the blunt way only a preteen can, because Mallory doesn't have any, so I'm not allowed to either. That set off fireworks behind the scenes. I wasn't there for the confrontation, but I heard about it afterward. My aunt apparently tore into my parents for punishing me for Mallory's loneliness. I got grounded, of course, accused of lying and causing a scene, but something did change. After that, my parents started giving me a little more freedom. Just enough to keep extended family from asking questions. Mallory transferred schools not long after. I think she was embarrassed that our relatives had found out how isolated she really was. My parents agreed to the transfer without hesitation, even though the new school was farther and cost more. Mallory made new friends there, but her grudge against me only grew stronger. She didn't go back to ignoring me, she doubled down. I was no longer a nuisance. I was a threat. Her new friends would come over and mock me openly. My parents called it light teasing. I stopped inviting anyone over because the few who came were either treated coldly by my parents or accused of taking things by Mallory. And, of course, Ronald and Corinne believed her. Eventually, I started spending more time with Harriet and our cousins. Our parents never dared to mistreat them, there were too many eyes, too many people who talk. Then, in high school, I met a boy. His name was Carter. He was kind and funny, and I felt like maybe something normal in my life was finally happening. I didn't want him to meet my family, but Corinne insisted. "We need to know who's spending time with our daughter," she said. Against my instincts, I agreed. I'll never forget what happened next. Carter pulled me aside after a brief moment alone in the living room. He told me Mallory had come into the room in a tight outfit, sat close to him, and started trash-talking me while batting her eyelashes. She even told him I was unstable and that he could do better with her. Carter wasn't just uncomfortable, he was disturbed. He left and refused to come back to my house again. But that wasn't the version Corinne and Ronald got. Mallory claimed Carter had hit on her, and she had nobly turned him down to protect me. Guess who they believed? Despite everything, I still believed Carter. Not just because I trusted him, but because, deep down, I knew Mallory. She wasn't clever about her manipulations. She was obvious. And my parents always let her get away with it. Carter and I didn't last. We tried to keep seeing each other quietly, but the tension made it too difficult. My next boyfriend? Same thing. Mallory tried to flirt, he rejected her, and she accused him of being inappropriate. The pattern repeated. Corinne and Ronald decided I was a poor judge of character, incapable of making good choices. They forbade me from seeing anyone at all. I stopped trying. It was easier to avoid heartbreak when the ending was always the same. My high school years were marked by isolation and silent resentment. The friendships I had faded away, either scared off by my family's coldness or simply pushed out of reach by my strict curfews and endless restrictions. I stayed close to Harriet and our cousins, but even that lifeline felt fragile. Mallory had poisoned the air so effectively at home that I constantly second-guessed myself, whether I was overreacting, whether I was the problem, whether maybe I really did deserve less. Mallory, meanwhile, thrived in her own limited universe. When she brought a boyfriend home, it was as if the second coming had arrived. Ronald and Corinne fawned over him, praising Mallory for her good judgment and asking me why I couldn't be more like her. Then, abruptly, he stopped coming around. I heard whispers he'd apparently used her or lied to her. The narrative flipped instantly, and he became the villain. My parents never admitted they were wrong about him. They simply rewrote the story and moved on, still convinced Mallory could do no wrong. By then, Mallory had started to live what my parents viewed as a model life. She had more spending money, a looser curfew, and full permission to do whatever she wanted. I, on the other hand, had to account for every hour of my day. If I brought it up, I was told, well, she's older. But when I reached her age, the same freedoms weren't extended to me. Instead, the rules changed again. I wasn't responsible enough. They used every incident, many of which were entirely manufactured by Mallory, as proof that I couldn't be trusted. Eventually, it came time for Mallory's graduation. She was accepted into a college, not a top-tier one, but good enough to keep up appearances. There were no scholarships. Her grades weren't strong. When she got a B, it was treated like winning an award. I, on the other hand, consistently got A's. But whenever I brought home a good report card, I was met with a shrug. You always get those, Corinne would say. What's there to celebrate? Naturally, my parents promised to pay for all of Mallory's college expenses. Tuition, housing, food, even extra money for shopping and travel. I didn't protest. I was just relieved she'd be out of the house. But the reprieve didn't last long. Mallory returned home every other weekend, always with some fabricated issue. Something had been moved in her room. I'd taken something. Or there was a problem at school that she needed to blame on someone. And that someone was always me. When my own graduation neared, Corinne sat me down for a conversation. She told me that, unfortunately, there wasn't enough money for 2 college tuitions. Since they were already covering everything for Mallory, they wouldn't be able to help me. Instead, I should start working right after graduation. Maybe they could help later, after Mallory finished her degree. If you want to stay here, she added, you'll need to pay rent. And utilities. And cover your own expenses. I was quiet. I didn't argue. Then I calmly said, okay. That clearly wasn't the reaction she expected. She pushed again, as if waiting for me to break down and cry. Maybe she hoped I'd throw a tantrum so she could use it as justification. But I didn't. I thanked her for her honesty and said I understood. Ronald tried the same approach a few days later, with the same result. I knew they were never going to support my education. I had prepared myself for that. It had been clear for years that I was on my own. What they didn't know was that I'd been working quietly towards scholarships. I had no social life, no extracurricular distractions. I poured everything into my studies because I saw higher education as my one chance at escape. And my work paid off. I received a full scholarship to a solid, reputable university, not Ivy League, but well-respected and competitive. It wasn't for a flashy major, but it was something I loved. The day I got the news, I posted about it on social media, publicly thanking my parents for always believing in me. It was a calculated move. If I told them privately, they could try to talk me out of going. But posting it publicly meant they'd have to explain to family why they didn't support their daughter's fully funded opportunity. At first, Ronald and Corinne played along. They even showed signs of pride. But a few weeks later, they changed their tune. Mallory, it turned out, wasn't doing well in college. She was struggling, and I suspected bruised their illusion that she was the brilliant golden child. They sat me down again and asked if I was sure I wanted to go. "You know, your sister is smarter than you, and she's having trouble," Corinne said. "Maybe college isn't a good fit for you either." I told them, politely but firmly, that I was going. That was the end of the conversation. College changed everything. I found peace. I found independence. I found people who saw me as a person, not a foil to my sister. I still called home occasionally, visited during holidays. But I never introduced a boyfriend to them. I wasn't going to risk a repeat of what had happened before. Mallory dropped out sometime during my sophomore year. There was no graduation celebration, just silence. She moved back home and started working at the same office as Corinne, thanks to a few strings pulled. I heard all of this secondhand. It was framed like an achievement. I didn't care. I just stayed focused. It was during my final year that I met Wesley. If there was ever someone born with the opposite temperament from mine, it's him. Where I had learned to stay quiet and survive, Wesley thrived on confrontation and strategy. He was the kind of person who, if slighted, wouldn't just reply, he'd wait, plan, and respond. Not out of cruelty, but because he believed people should face consequences for hurting others. I was in awe of him. I admired the way he moved through the world, fearless and grounded. But more than that, I admired how he treated me. With respect. With kindness. Like an equal. Like I mattered. People were surprised when we got serious. Wesley was fiery. I was meek. But that's what made us work. He never pushed me to change, he just stood beside me and protected me until I felt safe enough to be myself. When we started talking about marriage, we agreed we didn't want a huge, expensive wedding. We wanted a beautiful honeymoon, somewhere in Europe, somewhere new and ours alone. But we did want a ceremony. Something small, somewhere meaningful. Since Wesley's family was scattered and mine was still mostly in our hometown, we agreed to hold it there. We were living in a neighboring state, so it wasn't hard to plan trips back for the arrangements. We sent out the engagement announcements and saved the dates. That's when Corinne and Ronald reached out. They wanted to meet Wesley. I didn't want them to. Distance had dulled some of the pain of their favoritism, and I wasn't ready to invite it back into my life. But I struggled to say no. Years of conditioning made it hard to draw that line. I told Wesley they could meet him on the condition that I was always present and they were never alone with him. He looked at me like I'd told him Christmas was cancelled. "Absolutely not," he said. "I'm not just going to walk in blind. I'm going in prepared." Wesley bought a small voice recorder and hid it in his jacket pocket. "Just in case," he said with a grin. "You never know what they'll try." He was excited. Not nervous. Excited. He saw this as a game he was going to win. He went to their house alone, while I waited at a cafe nearby, chewing my nails and checking the time. When he finally walked in, he had a look on his face I'll never forget. "Babe," he said, pulling out the recorder. "You are not going to believe what they just asked me." Wesley sat across from me, eyes alight with something between disbelief and mischief. He clutched the recorder in one hand, his fingers drumming across the table like he couldn't wait to explode with everything he had to say. "Okay," he said, grinning. "You're not ready for this." I leaned in, bracing myself. He explained that after a few minutes of awkward small talk, Corinne and Ronald changed their tone. Mallory wasn't there at first, but she soon joined. They sat Wesley down and began what they called a proposal for fairness. They were willing to contribute to our wedding costs, but only under one condition. Mallory would walk down the aisle before me in a wedding dress. I stared at him, frozen. I laughed, because I thought he was joking. But he just slid the recorder across the table. "Listen," he said. I did. The recording was clear. Corinne's voice was calm, rehearsed, as she explained that it wasn't appropriate for a younger sister to marry first. Mallory deserved the experience of being a bride too on my day. They wanted her to wear a white dress, walk down the aisle first, have her own cake, and pose for photos. "It's symbolic," she said. "She just needs to feel included." Wesley paused the recording after a few minutes. "It gets worse," he said, "but I wanted to talk to you first so you didn't throw the recorder across the room." I didn't say anything. I didn't even know how to react. After everything, I thought I had stopped being surprised by them, but this? This was another level. I expected Wesley to be furious. But instead, he looked thrilled. "We're going to play alone," he said. "And then we're going to pull the rug out from under them in front of everyone." I blinked. "What do you mean, play alone?" "I mean," he said, "we tell them yes. We agree. We act like we're grateful. And then we make sure it never happens. We flip the plan. They think they're using us, we'll let them believe it." At first, I was hesitant. Part of me didn't want to deal with them at all. I wanted to elope, fly far away, and leave their nonsense behind. But another part of me, one I had never listened to before, wanted to see them held accountable. I wanted them to be embarrassed. Just once. Wesley called his older brother, Thatcher, a calm, practical man who could always be trusted to bring logic into any chaotic moment. Thatcher wasn't thrilled with the idea of deception, but when he heard the recording, he changed his tone. He didn't endorse our plan, but he admitted that something needed to be done. He also pointed out some of our initial ideas, like giving them the wrong venue or crashing the wedding from a second location, could lead to lawsuits. That helped us narrow down our strategy. We settled on something less dramatic but far more effective. We would pretend to agree. Let them think they were getting their way. Let Mallory pick the dress, the cake, the decor. Let them believe Wesley was under their thumb. Then, on the day of the wedding, we'd have security at the entrance to keep her out. But Wesley didn't stop there. He went back to my parents and told them that I had been resistant, but he believed he could convince me to go alone. He played the part of a people pleaser who just wanted peace in the family. He told them I didn't like conflict and wouldn't make a scene if surprised. But weddings were unpredictable, he said. What if I lashed out? What if I ruined it? Corinne and Ronald agreed. So Wesley proposed a compromise. They would continue paying for parts of the wedding, and he would secretly guide me into acceptance. They would make no written agreements, just to be safe, in case I found out. That way, they could always claim it was just a misunderstanding. They loved the plan. Wesley came home and laughed for nearly an hour. What followed was months of carefully staged manipulation. Wesley would take Mallory to taste test menus and show her the cheapest option, then act disappointed that we couldn't ask my parents to pay more. Predictably, Mallory would complain to Corinne and Ronald, who would then offer to upgrade our selection to the most expensive package, thinking it was a bribe to keep me quiet. Same thing happened with the florist. Wesley showed Mallory a simple bouquet, said I didn't like it, but we couldn't afford anything better. Result? Corinne insisted on paying for the bouquet I actually wanted. The photographer. The venue. The band. Every choice we made was framed as a compromise, just to keep me calm. They didn't realize they were paying for our dream wedding. We called it emotional back pay. They even tried to interfere with my wedding dress. Corinne sent a photo of a gown she wanted me to wear. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't me. I declined in writing, suspecting they might try to use a text thread as proof later. Wesley told them I was being unreasonable and pretended to sympathize. That's when Mallory suggested he destroy the dress I actually wanted. He pretended to consider it. Everything they said and did was kept off written records. When Mallory messaged Wesley, I was the one who replied. We created the illusion that I was controlling and insecure, someone who might explode if she discovered what they were planning. They believed it. Wesley even claimed I checked his phone daily, just to add to the illusion. We laughed about it almost every night. I couldn't believe how far they were willing to go. But part of me wasn't surprised. I'd spent years being treated as less than. This just confirmed what I had always suspected. They didn't see me as a person. I was a placeholder. A character in someone else's story. But the beauty of the plan wasn't just in the revenge, it was in the clarity. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to their actions. I was orchestrating mine. When the wedding day finally arrived, we were ready. The morning of the wedding was calm, eerily so. Everything had been arranged. The vendors were confirmed, the venue was set, and our guest list had been double-checked. Wesley and I had even done a walkthrough with the head of security the night before, giving strict instructions. Under no circumstance was Mallory to be allowed into the venue once the ceremony began. To avoid raising suspicion, we assigned an inconspicuous woman with a clipboard to check guests off a list. She looked like any other wedding coordinator, so when people arrived and checked in, no one thought twice about it. Our real security, a tall, broad man named Trent, remained out of sight until it was time. Mallory was scheduled to arrive just as the bridal processional began. The plan my parents and Wesley had agreed on was to start the music, and at that precise moment, Mallory would appear at the end of the aisle in a white dress, walking proudly down before me. She thought she was stealing the spotlight. What she didn't know was that she wouldn't make it past the front gate. Corinne and Ronald arrived early, all smiles, none the wiser. They were seated near the front, excited to see their plan unfold. Our mutual friend Cassie, who knew everything and relished drama almost as much as Wesley, stood ready to play her role. When Ronald received the text that Mallory was 5 minutes away, he stood and motioned for the bridesmaids to begin their walk down the aisle. My bridesmaids, fully briefed, obeyed without question. They took their places. Ronald moved toward the entrance, expecting Mallory to appear. But instead, the music swelled. And I stepped through the doors. For a second, Ronald just stood there, stunned. His face drained of color. I didn't look back. I held my bouquet, took a steady breath, and walked forward. Then his phone rang. It was Mallory. He muttered something and turned away, disappearing back toward the entrance. Guests looked around in confusion. That's when Cassie sprang into action. Loudly, dramatically, she gasped and asked, "What happened? Why did he leave the bride?" I wiped at my eyes real tears. Not just from the stress of the moment, but from something deeper. Something I hadn't let myself feel until then. I said quietly, but loud enough for the nearest rows to hear, "He told me it wasn't supposed to be me here." That wasn't what he said, of course. But Wesley and I had agreed ahead of time if Ronald abandoned me at the altar, I was to spin it to my advantage. Paint him as the villain. For once, let them explain. Cassie shouted again, "What do you mean it wasn't supposed to be you?" before running off to get answers. In reality, she sprinted toward the entrance to join the chaos that was now unfolding. Outside, Mallory had arrived. She wore a full white gown with a veil, hairstyled, makeup done like a bride. Trent, the security guard, blocked her at the gate. "There's already a bride inside," he said. "You must be at the wrong event." Mallory, as expected, threw a fit. She insisted she was the real bride. Trent remained calm and repeated that she wasn't on the list, and no uninvited guests were permitted once the ceremony began. Ronald tried to argue, claiming Trent wasn't official. Trent, completely unfazed, invited him to call the venue manager or the police. "I was hired by the couple," he said. "And unless you have proof to the contrary, you need to leave." That's when Cassie arrived, phone in hand, pretending to record everything. She began loudly accusing Mallory of trying to steal someone's wedding, drawing attention from other guests who were lingering near the lobby. My mother, Corinne, soon joined the scene, trying to de-escalate, but it was too late. Curious guests started drifting toward the noise. Conversations erupted. People gasped as they realized Mallory was in a bridal gown. Cassie whipped the situation into a full-on confrontation. Mallory screamed. My father threatened to sue. And then Wesley appeared. He looked completely composed. He stared at my parents and said, "What is going on?" "You know exactly what this is," Corinne snapped. "I really don't," Wesley replied. "Why would Mallory be wearing a wedding dress to our wedding?" They tried to claim he had agreed to everything. That this was part of the plan. That I was just overreacting. Wesley raised an eyebrow. "If that's true, where's the proof?" Of course, there was none. No texts, no emails, no paper trail. Everything had been deliberately kept verbal under his suggestion. "Well, he told us not to write anything down," Corinne said. Wesley turned to the gathering crowd. "So let me get this straight. You showed up in a wedding gown. To someone else's wedding. Without any written agreement. And now you're upset because security did their job?" The whispers turned into murmurs. The murmurs turned into shock. Someone recorded part of the confrontation and uploaded it to social media later, though I didn't see it until long after our honeymoon. Mallory collapsed onto the ground, crying. Ronald tried to drag her up. Corinne began pleading with the guests to understand the family dynamics. But no one bought it. They were told to leave the property. They had no choice but to obey. Back inside, I reached the altar with Wesley. His father had stepped up to walk me down after Ronald's dramatic exit. Wesley squeezed my hand and whispered, "You were incredible." I smiled through the last of my tears. We said our vows. We exchanged rings. We kissed. And just like that, I was no longer the background character in someone else's play. The reception was joyful, light, and filled with love. No one mentioned what had happened. Maybe they were being polite. Or maybe they knew I needed one night where everything didn't revolve around Mallory. That night, at our hotel, Wesley took my phone and began documenting everything. Screenshots of missed calls from my parents. Mallory's rambling, bitter message blaming me for setting her up. Claims that Wesley had led her on. Accusations that he was cheating on me with her. He compiled the screenshots, attached the audio clips, and sent them to our extended family group chat with the following message. We wanted to enjoy our honeymoon in peace. Unfortunately, we are now receiving threatening and harassing messages. We hope you all understand why we've chosen to go no contact for now. Please respect our boundaries and do not share our location. Thank you for your love and support. The response from family was overwhelming. Messages of encouragement. Apologies. Offers to help. And most importantly, silence from my parents and Mallory. It's been quiet since then. Wesley jokes that he's disappointed Mallory didn't sneak onto a flight to follow us to Italy just for more drama. I'm not so sure she's done, but for now, the peace is everything I hoped it would be. I used to dream about a family who would cheer for me, celebrate with me, and love me for who I am. That never came. But on my wedding day, I stood up for myself. I let the truth be seen. And I built something new with someone who's never asked me to be smaller so someone else could shine. That's a victory I'll never forget.